Welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to really unpack a program called MentalSpace School.
Right.
It's this K-12 mental health support initiative that's specifically designed for schools in Georgia.
Yeah, and we've got a whole stack of their blueprints and outcome reports to go through today.
Exactly. We're looking at how they are basically trying to rewire student support systems from the ground up. But before we get into the mechanics of it, I want you to picture a scenario.
Oh, yeah, the call.
Yeah. Have you ever received that call from your child's school? You know the one. You're just like sitting in the middle of your workday, your phone buzzes, you look down, and it's the school.
Your stomach just completely drops.
It really does. You answer and you hear a voice talking about slipping grades or maybe a sudden change in behavior, acting out, things like that.
Or even completely withdrawing from their friends.
Right. And you know deep down in your gut that something much more profound is going on. But the terrifying part is you don't know exactly what it is, and you don't know how to help them.
And if you are listening to this right now and you've experienced that exact scenario, the documentation we're looking at today starts by validating that very specific feeling. It literally says, you're not alone and you're not failing.
Yeah, that really struck me.
I mean, that feeling of complete helplessness as a parent is just incredibly common, but it's rarely talked about openly.
Okay, let's unpack this because what MentalSpace is actually offering to families who are struggling, it starts with a pretty radical shift. They operate on this premise that sometimes kids just desperately need a safe space that is outside of the home.
And outside of the school.
Right, outside of both, just to process what they're feeling. And I was reading this and thinking, a kid's emotional state is kind of like a pressure cooker.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, or like a tightly wound watch. School represents this incredibly high-pressure environment, academic expectations, the social hierarchy, peer pressure. It's intense.
The baseline stress of just navigating a crowded hallway is enormous.
Exactly. And then they go home. And home can be another high-pressure cooker. You've got chores, complex family dynamics, or even just the pressure of knowing your parents are super worried about you.
Right, the parents are stressed, so the kid gets stressed.
Yeah, so the pressure just builds and builds. So my question for you is, why is a neutral third space so critical for a child's emotional release? Especially if, they're accessing this space via teletherapy while they are still physically inside the school building.
Well, what's fascinating here is the psychology of boundaries and consequences. When a teenager is operating in the school environment or the home environment, the adults in those spaces are tied to real-world consequences.
Like grades or being grounded.
Exactly. If a student tells their math teacher they're drowning emotionally, they might secretly worry the teacher is going to judge their academic capability, right? Or treat them differently. And if they tell a parent, they risk hurting the parent's feelings or triggering this whole cascade of worried interrogations.
Right, the stakes are just too high. The adults in their lives have skin in the game.
I absolutely do. So MentalSpace introduces this third space via teletherapy to basically remove the skin from the game.
Okay, so how does that physically work?
The child goes into a designated room in the school, usually like a private, quiet office setup just for this, puts on headphones, and connects with a neutral therapist on a screen.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so that physical separation, even though they're still in the building, creates an emotional clean room. They can vent about their anger or fear, and it doesn't impact their GPA or their weekend privileges.
But wait, the program still partners directly with the school, right? So how do you maintain that clean room if the therapist is, eventually reporting back to the principal?
Well, they aren't handing over a literal transcript of the kid's deepest secrets.
Okay, good.
The mechanism here is about creating a bridge without blending the worlds. So the therapist gives the student that neutral zone, but they also give the school administrators high-level actionable guidance.
Like what kind of guidance?
They might say to the school, hey, this student requires a 5-minute hall pass when they get overwhelmed. Or, we need to adjust their testing environment.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so it equips the adults who run the school with practical tools, but it absolutely doesn't violate the child's sanctuary.
That makes total sense conceptually. But I mean, it brings up a huge logistical hurdle. Access.
Always the biggest hurdle.
Right. Access is usually where this entire mental health infrastructure just completely collapses. When a student is like a pressure cooker that's about to blow, when they're in an active crisis, how quickly can they actually get into that clean room?
Well, traditionally, they just sit on a wait list. You might realize your kid needs help in October, and the soonest you can get an intake appointment is like March.
which is entirely useless in an emergency.
Completely useless.
But the MentalSpace documentation claims they provide same-day teletherapy, and they also list crisis intervention, suicide prevention, violence prevention. I really have to push back on the logistics of this, though. The difference between a 6-month waitlist and same-day access is staggering. And beyond that, how does a person on a computer screen handle a severe crisis?
It sounds impossible, right?
Yeah. I mean, if a student is having a violent outburst or actively self-harming, a screen just seems completely insufficient to physically intervene.
So executing that requires a totally different infrastructure than standard therapy. MentalSpace isn't just some generic telehealth call center that routes kids to random providers in other states.
Yeah.
They actually assign dedicated therapist teams to each specific K-12 school. It's really population-level health management.
So they're essentially embedding a clinical unit directly into that specific school's ecosystem.
Exactly. The whole safety net relies on the team actually knowing the environment because they're assigned to that one building. They know the bell schedule, they know the admin staff, the cultural climate of the school.
Oh, wow. So they aren't flying blind.
Not at all. So when a crisis hits, the teletherapist is on the screen, actively de-escalating the panic using clinical techniques. But simultaneously, and this is the key, they're instantly coordinating with the school counselor or the resource officer who is physically standing right outside the door.
Ah, so they act as like the clinical quarterback in real time,
Right.
directing the physical staff while they manage the psychological part.
You nailed it. That is the core mechanism. For everyday anxiety, that same-day therapy prevents the spiral. But for a severe crisis, the immediate access combined with the on-the-ground staff coordination turns it into a structured triage system.
That's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, a 6-month wait list is a fatal flaw in mental health care. Real-time integration is what actually saves lives.
Okay, so once we understand that real-time quarterbacking, we have to kind of zoom out because the child doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Right.
Here's where it gets really interesting. MentalSpace expands this care model outward. First, they use licensed, diverse, and culturally competent therapists. Second, they offer staff wellness. And third, they provide family counseling. But, I mean, are schools supposed to be full-service community hospitals now? Providing therapy for parents and teachers seems like a massive scope creep for an educational institution.
I hear that a lot, but if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's really the only way sustainable behavioral change happens.
So?
Well, think about it. If you only treat a child for 1 hour a week and then drop them right back into a highly dysregulated home or classroom, the intervention fails.
That's true. The pressure cooker just heats up again.
Exactly. Let's look at the therapist first. The sources highlight that they use licensed diverse therapists who are culturally competent.
Right. How does that specific phrasing actually change the care on the ground?
Well, cultural competence is a massive clinical tool. Imagine a student navigating the pressures of being a first-generation immigrant or dealing with, like, racial trauma. If they sit down with a therapist who lacks that specific cultural context, the student has to spend the first 5 sessions just explaining their baseline existence.
Oh, man, yeah. It just turns into an exhausting educational exercise for the kid instead of actual therapy.
Precisely. And the therapist might even misinterpret a cultural norm. Like in some cultures, a lack of eye contact is a sign of respect. But a therapist without that background might diagnose it as evasion or some sort of pathology.
Wow, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. So when a program provides therapists who just immediately get those nuances, the barrier to entry vanishes. The kid feels seen, and they can get straight to the real clinical work.
That makes total sense. And then expanding that to the family.
Right, if a child learns all these great coping mechanisms, but their parents are still operating out of perpetual panic, the child's progress is going to stall. Family counseling creates this unified clinical vocabulary at home.
So the parents are actually learning how to reinforce the boundaries the kid is trying to practice.
Exactly.
And what about the staff wellness component? I mean, we constantly hear about teacher burnout, but integrating it into a student mental health program is pretty unique.
Well, think back to your pressure cooker analogy. If the teacher at the front of the room is totally emotionally depleted, just running on 0 fumes, the ambient stress of that entire classroom skyrockets.
Oh, absolutely. Children absorb that tension immediately.
Right. So providing staff wellness addresses the baseline anxiety of the whole building. MentalSpace is treating the ecosystem that produces the symptoms rather than just, playing an endless game of whack-a-mole with individual student crises.
Treating the ecosystem sounds brilliant in theory, but as a parent or a school administrator listening to this, the logistical reality seems like an absolute bureaucratic nightmare.
Oh, it's a tangled web for sure.
I mean, we are talking about medical care, educational institutions, insurance companies, state laws, all colliding at once.
And bureaucracy is historically what strangles these types of innovations before they even get off the ground.
Let's look at how they claim to navigate it, though. From a financial standpoint, the source states Medicaid is covered at $0.
Yep, zero out of pocket.
And they also accept a massive roster of commercial insurances. Blue Cross, Cigna, Aetna, Humana, plus state-specific ones like Peach State and CareSource.
It's a very comprehensive list.
On the compliance side, it says they are both HIPAA and FERPA compliant, and then there's this legislative component. The text explicitly says they provide HB 268 compliance support, noting a strict July 2026 deadline.
That deadline is key.
I want to zero in on that. Is a looming state mandate the actual catalyst forcing Georgia schools to adopt these massive systems right now?
Honest answer, yes. Legislation with a hard deadline is almost always the ultimate accelerant for institutional change.
So their hands are tied.
Well, school districts might philosophically want better mental health support anyway, but an impending state mandate forces it right to the top of the budget priority list.
Right. So what exactly is HB 268?
It represents a push for comprehensive mental health safety nets and crisis response plans across Georgia schools. And mandates like this are incredibly complex to execute. They can totally overwhelm a district's resources.
So MentalSpace basically offers them a way to outsource that compliance so the school doesn't have to build a psychiatric department from scratch.
Exactly. They bring the infrastructure with them.
That explains the timing for the schools for sure. But what about the privacy laws? You mentioned HIPAA and FERPA. How do those actually interact when a medical therapist is operating inside a public school?
It's historically a complete legal minefield.
Yeah.
So HIPAA protects medical privacy health records, psychiatric notes, diagnoses, all that.
Or the doctor stuff.
Yeah. And FERPA protects educational records, report cards, attendance, disciplinary files.
Mm-hmm.
So when a medical provider is inside a school, they are generating highly sensitive medical records in a space that is strictly governed by educational laws. Administrators are absolutely terrified of violating either one.
I can imagine. So how do they fix that?
MentalSpace built an infrastructure that basically translates between the two. They secure the medical data on their end, under HIPAA, while only providing the legally permissible, non-confidential educational guidance to the school under FERPA.
Ah. They act as the firewall between the clinic and the classroom.
Exactly. A secure firewall.
That's clever. And what about the financial friction? Listing all those insurance providers is great, but how does the billing actually work to ensure families aren't just getting buried in hidden fees?
The financial mechanics are specifically designed to remove hesitation. By accepting major commercial plans, they capture the insured population, and they handle all the complex claims processing.
So the school district doesn't have to hire a whole team of medical billing specialists.
Right, which they don't have the budget for anyway. But the really crucial piece of this ecosystem is offering Medicaid at $0.
Yeah, that seems huge.
It is. In traditional therapy, even a small $20 copay can be a complete deal breaker for a family that's deciding between mental health care and buying groceries.
Definitely.
So by eliminating the out-of-pocket cost for Medicaid-eligible students, they systematically dismantle the financial barrier for the most vulnerable kids in the district. It equalizes access to that same daycare.
Okay, so we've mapped out the infrastructure, the ecosystem approach, and this financial firewall. The final step for any deep dive is looking at the receipts. Does this massive deployment of resources actually yield tangible results?
The numbers are pretty striking.
They really are. The outcomes provided in our sources are highly specific. 89% improved attendance, 92% reduced anxiety, and 85% family satisfaction.
Yeah.
I mean, I always wonder how much of this data is self-reported, but putting the methodology aside for a second. So what does this all mean? I want to focus on that 89% attendance figure. It is wild to me that a deeply internal, emotional intervention translates into a highly measurable physical metric, like literally just walking into a building.
Well, this raises an important question about how the educational system has traditionally viewed absenteeism.
But so.
For decades, chronic absenteeism was treated purely as a disciplinary issue. A student isn't showing up, so the school deploys a truant officer or assigns detention or penalizes the parents. The core assumption was always defiance.
Right, the classic playing hooky narrative, skipping class to go to the mall.
Exactly. But connect these numbers, and a completely different mechanical reality emerges. Look at the 92% drop in anxiety.
Mm.
When you understand that the school environment can act like that high-pressure cooker we talked about, you realize that for a lot of these kids, not showing up isn't defiance at all. It's avoidance.
Oh,
It's
wow.
a biological nervous system response. It's a coping mechanism for unmanageable anxiety.
So they aren't skipping school for fun. They're skipping because the physical building itself triggers a panic response.
Exactly. So when MentalSpace deploys this ecosystem, giving the student that emotional clean room, engaging the parents, supporting the exhausted teachers, they are targeting the root cause of the avoidance.
That makes so much sense.
When you reduce that crippling anxiety by 92%, the student's nervous system finally regulates. And the natural, inevitable byproduct is the student feeling safe enough to physically cross the threshold of the school doors.
So the 89% boost in attendance is literally the physical proof that the emotional intervention is functioning.
It validates the entire structural model.
And that naturally feeds right into that final metric, the 85% family satisfaction. I mean, if your child is significantly less anxious and is consistently attending school without a fight every morning, the ambient temperature of your own home drops.
Right, the parents get their family dynamic back.
Yeah. It proves that treating mental health as an interconnected ecosystem rather than just, a siloed individual failing
Yeah.
really benefits the entire community.
Absolutely. The school meets its attendance and compliance metrics, the child learns to process their emotional load, and the parents finally find some relief.
Well, let's summarize what we've discovered today. The core value of the MentalSpace School Initiative really comes down to providing an immediate, culturally competent, and financially accessible bridge between the home and the K-12 school system.
They're essentially rewiring the infrastructure in Georgia to proactively treat the whole ecosystem rather than just reacting when a crisis boils over.
They're turning the school into a hub for holistic wellness. And they're outsourcing the clinical heavy lifting so the educators can focus their energy on, actually educating.
Exactly.
For anyone listening in Georgia right now, or honestly anyone who just wants to examine how this model functions, the specific contact info from our sources is mentalspaceschool.com, or you can email them directly at mentalspaceschool@axtedtherapy.com.
Definitely worth checking out.
Now, earlier we talked about that sinking feeling of getting a call from the school. The source material poses a very direct question, and we want to pass it on to you, the listener. What is the hardest part about supporting your child's mental health?
It's such an important question.
It really is. Seriously, think about it. We are listening, and it's a conversation that needs to happen out loud.
It's a vital dialogue for any community to have without the stigma.
Absolutely. As we finish our deep dive today, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We spent all this time analyzing the immediate logistical impact on K-12 students. But think about the long game here. If immediate same-day teletherapy, neutral third spaces, and this kind of comprehensive ecosystem support become a seamless, normal part of the childhood school experience, how might this radically shift the emotional intelligence, the resilience, and the workplace expectations of the next generation of adults as they graduate and enter the real world?
That's a huge thought.
Right. If we teach them how to identify and process their mental load when they are 12, just imagine what they will be capable of building when they are 25.